Nice. Well, thank you all for joining us. We're really happy to have you here today, and we're going to be talking about creating a culture of kindness using research-based approaches to prevent bullying. And I've done this presentation now. This is the third time I've done it. I've done it at a couple of conferences. I did it at ISTE, and I believe it was ASCA or one of the other conferences this summer. And the reason that I've been kind of pushing this topic lately is because I do think that we have a rare opportunity to recreate school culture right now. You know, a lot of our schools were doing remote learning last year, and so we're coming back together for the first time, many of us. And I think, gosh, you know, how about we come back better than we were before? That's just something that, you know, I feel like that there's an opportunity to come back and do some things differently as far as school culture. And so, and I also think for many of the kids in your schools who had been targeted in terms of bullying prior to the pandemic, many of those kids had a better time doing homeschool as what they have in our live school environments. And I also think that that's also very sad that a child would rather be alone at home than be in school because it's unsafe for them emotionally or potentially physically as well. So anyway, that was some of my motivation for wanting to do this topic. And I see quite a number of you have signed up for our event today. So it's obviously something that you're thinking about as well. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. We are going to be talking a little bit about what bullying is and how big the problem is. And we're going to talk about bullying prevention and social emotional learning. I know many of you are doing SEL. SEL has been a really on the rise over the last 5 or 6 years, especially. So we're going to talk about how SEL relates to bullying prevention and also what gaps exist. If all you're doing is SEL, there are some gaps that are there that you'll want to fill in order to really do bullying prevention well. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about what we know from research, and we're going to try to leave you with some really practical strategies and resources for your school or district that you can start using to try to do this work. We're going to be doing a Q&A at the end, and also we're going to be able to answer questions as we go along too here in the chat box. So my name's Amy Walker. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Committee for Children. I have been at Committee for Children for almost 20 years. And in that work, I have worked with literally hundreds of schools and districts around the country doing social emotional learning, doing bullying prevention, and doing child abuse prevention. And I have learned a lot in those many years in terms of what it takes to do this work well. And also my colleague Sarah Rubin is also in a role at Committee for Children working directly with our fabulous clients out in schools and districts. So perhaps Sarah could say hello and share a little bit about your role at Committee for Children and also your role in our webinar today.
Hi, thank you, Amy. Yes, I am a success manager, which means that I work directly with school options in particular. So I'll work with principals or counselors at the schools who are implementing our programs or looking at solutions and supports for bullying prevention and SEL through our programs. Happy to work with everybody as they come in. And I work internationally as well as with some of our U.S. Districts.
Yeah, and I also had asked Sarah today too. I don't have children myself, but Sarah is also a mom, so she's gonna. I thought also during our conversation today, she might chime in with her mom hat as well, just talking about some of the ways, you know, schools could engage families around your efforts around bullying prevention. I think she's got a lot of experience doing that too. So before we begin, like I said, we are in Seattle, Washington at Committee for Children, and we are a nonprofit organization. And actually, that slide is slightly outdated, and we are now estimating our programs are reaching over 20 million children in 50 states. And our mission is to foster the safety and well-being of children through social emotional learning and development. We also do a lot of advocacy work way back when states were adopting bullying mandates around reporting and things. We were really front and center on that work, and it's been great to see how every single state now has bullying prevention legislation. So Before we get started, I want to start with our equity statement, and our commitment is to recognize, condemn, disrupt, and seek to rectify systemic injustices that create barriers to children's success. So that is really perfect for our topic today, certainly. And also, Committee for Children's Offices sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, past and present, specifically the first people of Seattle, Washington, the Duwamish tribe. As we honor the Duwamish people and the Duwamish land, it is important that we consider our place in the past, present, future history of the indigenous people of our region and how we can best support them. And we're also going to be touching a little bit on race-based bullying as well today. So what is bullying and how big is the problem? So let's start with the definition. Bullying is unwanted and negative behavior that's repeated, intentionally meant to harm, and involves real or perceived imbalance of power. Sarah and I were talking about this as we were preparing for our webinar last week, because the definition is important, because I think one of the things that can happen is that sometimes people think everything is bullying. And there's a lot of behavior that kids can exhibit at schools, which can be really negative and sometimes quite awful, but actually not all of that is bullying. So it really has an intentionality about it. It has it is repeated. Because if something happens one-off, it certainly can be a really bad situation and can require interventions and consequences and things. But it's the repeated, consistent nature of it, as well as the intentionality and the imbalance of power. So we're talking about physical, verbal, online bullying, and like I said, imbalances of power, and that can be related to age, size, strength, social status, support of friends, access to resources. All sorts of things can play into that power dynamic. Is there anything else, Sarah, that I'm kind of missing in terms of just starting level setting with that definition?
I think that it's really important to think about the repeated. It is something that might be repeated as well. Like it might be leading into that repetition. If you can see that potential for repetition, not just that it's already happening multiple times.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. In bullying in the United States, 1 in 5 students reports being bullied on school property. 85% of bullying happens at school, but teachers only see about 50%. I actually personally think it's a lot less than 50%. But that's just my opinion. And suicide is at an all-time high in the U.S. It is the second leading cause of death for children ages 10 to 14, and the second leading cause of death for young people ages 15 to 34. So, and I think also too, although we do not have slides on it, I think bullying also can lead to substance abuse and a lot of other things. And this is in terms of the kids that are targeted. And also, it would be really interesting to see if a study has been done on kids that exhibit this bullying behavior. The kids are doing the bullying. If that, I can imagine that probably shows up later on in terms of looking like domestic violence and other things as well. So probably those behaviors, don't get better with age either. So bias-based bullying, all forms of bullying harm kids, but bias-based harassment, when the underlying cause or motivation is prejudice, causes specific and increased harm. So Black, American Indian, Alaska Native youth are racially bullied or harassed at a rate twice of their presence in the overall student population. Kids who are victims of peers' bias-based language, such as being called names, are 4 times as likely as those who don't have this experience to feel sad, and about 3 times as likely to lose friends and avoid school activities. I know Sarah works with our clients, and I have spent many, many years at Committee for Children working with our clients, and we get calls every day from school districts wanting to know, what they can do to support kids, when it comes to things like racism, and doing bullying prevention work is certainly falls into the category of something that you can be doing to try to keep the kids in your schools safe and to create schools that are welcoming, inclusive, so that all kids are happy to be there. They all can feel included and they can make friends, and it's a safe place to thrive academically and socially. And also gender harassment. This is another thing. So we see a lot of race-based bullying, and we also see gender harassment. And especially, this is 65% of LGBTQ youth frequently hear from homophobic remarks. 85% of LGBTQ youth are verbally harassed. 85%. That is awful. That is the experience of so many of our kids in our schools. So 71% of students report regularly hearing gay used in a negative way. And 56% of all students report hearing negative remarks about gender nonconformity. So, and also, again, the rates of suicide of LGBTQIA plus kids are also significantly higher than other kids. So, we're talking about really big problems and also big opportunities to create schools where this is not the case. One of the things we know is that bullying changes. It looks different as kids get older. So in elementary, it's often the direct bullying, physical, name calling, damaging property, stealing backpacks, things like that. It's often a sign of having poor social skills, and it's engaged in by relatively few kids in terms of the ones that are actually doing the bullying. And then as it gets older, it gets, more indirect. It's more social exclusion, rumors, minimizing adult recognition, requires stronger social skills to get that kind of power dynamic, and engaged in by many students. And also what's not listed on here is that as kids get older too, more and more of their social lives move online too, which also makes it more difficult for teachers and school leaders and families to deal with, because they're not there where this stuff is happening. So online bullying, 70% of teens are on social media every single day. 1/3 of teens report being bullied on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. This slide's a few years old, probably. There's new platforms now that aren't listed here, and I think probably not many of the kids are even on Facebook anymore. But the teens between 12 and 18, 20% report being bullied, and 15% of this is happening online. Again, this slide's a few years old, and I suspect that this data, I should say, is a few years old, and I think some of these are probably worse now. So consequences, serious problems, serious consequences for the victims. And in fact, I actually prefer to use targets than victims myself. We probably should have changed that slide, but, and those who bully others. And also too, you'll note we don't use the word bully too as a label, because we're talking about behavior here, not a person. No one is born a bully. Bullying is a behavior, that is learned and can also be changed. So, and then bystanders. So we have consequences of all of these kids on, the kids that are targeted, those that bully, as well as the bystanders. And this is, like I said, the increase of tobacco, alcohol, and drug use, higher chance of mental health issues, more likely to skip or miss school. And these things too, these consequences of bullying also go forth for many, many years to come. People who, had serious problems with bullying in childhood, can still talk about it in a very, very real and painful way 50 years later. It is something that really, when kids experience this in childhood, it is something that comes with them their whole lives. And also, I think that can be a call for all of us educators that, by doing this work, we're really having the potential to impact kids' lives in a really profound way. I also say the same thing when we talk about our child abuse prevention work, is that doing child abuse prevention and bullying prevention schools is perhaps some of the most important work that we can do as educators. So I am going to show you now a video of just one of our colleagues at Committee for Children talking about, kind of this label of a bully.
There's a misperception about bullying being a problem of like a bad kid. We'll just get rid of the bullies, and that isn't what works in bullying prevention. One of the things that we really try to help adults and children understand is that a person can do bullying behaviors, but we don't want people to really be identified as a bully. It's not a fixed characteristic. It's not who you are. It is a behavior that you can choose not to do. It really is a social and environmental problem. If the environment is accepting and conducive to behaviors that are negative, then they'll thrive there. But there are certain things that we know you can do to make it less likely. A lot of them have to do with relationship building with students, trust building, and helping students know that bullying behaviors are not okay in our classroom, in our school.
Yeah, so before we dive into the topic of bullying prevention and SEL, is there anything more that we should be talking about, Sarah, that you can think of in terms of just, sort of what is bullying and what it looks like in our schools?
I mean, I think everybody knows a little bit about what it looks like. Everybody has experienced it either as a bystander or as someone who has experienced being bullied. I think one of the things to remember is, as we are leaders in our schools, is that oftentimes the impact is as big on the person who's bullying or on the bystanders as it is on the people who are being bullied directly. There may be differences in how they're experiencing it, but in terms of their academic success and their life skills and life success and the things that they need to succeed, the bullying is affecting every single one of them.
Thank you. Another thing I wanted to add here, too, in terms of what bullying looks like in our schools, is that I also wanted to point out that sometimes bullying shows up with the adults in our schools, in addition to with kids. I think all of us who've been in the workplace for a while have experienced bullying in the workplace. I think oftentimes we've experienced colleagues or principals or, really sort of dysfunctional power dynamics showing up. It could be more veteran staff treating newer staff, like they're less than, or principals who, who bully, or, there are other adult dynamics too that can show up in schools. And I think that's also, in terms of also racial microaggressions, things like that among teachers. And I think also that as we're advocating for doing bullying prevention for our kids, I think we could also think about ways that we could create, schools that are also welcoming, inclusive, and kind and supportive for the adults that work in our buildings, because, we can't bring our full selves to show up for kids if we're not working in an environment that feels safe for us. So, I think we have an SEL for Adults program at Committee for Children. And the very first unit that we have in this is on building trust, because when we looked at the research in terms of what does it take to create great schools, we knew that that sort of the foundational SEL support for teachers is really, really important. And the place our research team had our program start out was building trust, because basically when teachers feel like they are safe and that they can trust their colleagues and that they work in community, then they also, that gives them their possibility of showing up in their best way too.
And it builds that culture into the school so that the students are experiencing that sense of trust amongst their teachers and amongst the staff there that will build a sense of community for them as well.
Yeah. Right. And I know a lot of schools are doing, DEI work and diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just for kids, but also for teachers. And both are important. And, we certainly are trying our best at Committee for Children to create that kind of workplace for our staff. And, we hope you use some of our SEL for Adults resources to do that as well. So bullying prevention and SEL. What is SEL? SEL is about understanding and processing emotions, setting and achieving positive goals, feeling and showing empathy for others, establishing and maintaining positive relationships, making responsible decisions, and another aspect can be transformative SEL, using SEL as a lever for equity. SEL is great. I have been, like I said, at Committee for Children for 20 years. Sarah's been at Committee for Children for many years. We love SEL at Committee for Children. And also, if you are doing SEL, no matter how fabulous you are doing with SEL, that does not check the box for saying that you are doing bullying prevention. And I know many schools wish it did. Because sure, it's SEL is all about teaching these positive skills that can help kids thrive and grow and make friends, and certainly SEL is very, very foundational to bullying prevention. We're teaching empathy. We're teaching compassion. We're teaching how to problem solve. We teach kids assertiveness. We teach how to ask for help. We teach a lot of skills that can help kids show up in positive ways as bystanders, managing their own emotions, being a better person in the world. But there are some things that really also need to be done to teach bullying prevention. So, like I said, SEL is the foundation for many things we do, and it's a critical thing. And in fact, at the elementary level, we have a bullying prevention unit that is an additional program that you can buy, an additional unit that goes on to second step. And we won't even sell that to you unless you're not also doing the SEL program, because it's that foundational that we know that our bullying prevention unit cannot even be taught as its own thing, because you need that empathy, you need the assertiveness skills, you need the friendship skills, you need all of that to be the foundation to then learn about bystander behavior and reporting bullying and these things. In our middle school program, we have a unit that is bullying and harassment. So if you're doing an SEL program, the program that you're using might have a unit that is based on bullying prevention. But if not, then you'll need to go and look to ways to add that. So like I said, SEL teaches these foundational skills: empathy, emotion management, problem solving, friendship building, assertiveness. These are some of the examples of skills that SEL teaches. And also so basically in terms of the targets, the children who bully, and the bystanders, we can see here on this little chart, I'll pause for a minute to let you look at it, just in terms of how each of these supports each of the roles. And it's one of those things that if we want to do effective research-based bullying prevention, we need to do it across the whole school, because that's the only thing that works. So, there are some schools that will have, kind of friendship groups, or they'll have like a life skills class where they teach SEL, where they're maybe even doing it as a tier 2, where the counselor is teaching SEL. That's not recommended. We always recommend that SEL be done school-wide. However, even if you're teaching SEL to a small group of kids, those kids benefit and those kids learn SEL skills. When it comes to bullying prevention, you cannot do it just in a small group, because all of the research shows that the way to make a difference in bullying is about the bystanders. So if you're just having consequences and coaching for the kids that are doing the bullying, and you're offering support and resources for the child that's targeted, those are good things to do. But if you're not reaching the bystanders with your prevention program, you're not probably going to make a very big difference in terms of changing the culture of your school. So that is also something really important to think about, is that you can't just do bullying prevention with the kids who are directly involved, because it is the bystanders that all of the research speaks to is the thing that makes a difference. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to create this culture among kids where it isn't cool to be mean, where kindness is cool, and inclusion is cool, and diversity is cool, and being friends with kids that are different is cool. That's what we're trying to do. And so there's where, we want to empower all of the bystanders. What have I missed, Sarah? Anything more about kind of SEL and bullying prevention and the way they intersect and the way they don't?
No, I think it just is really clear that they are important together, and building that culture is not just about saying this is what we want, but actually having the skills for everyone. Right.
Yeah. And also too, we have skills for kids, and we also, one of the things we know with bullying prevention, which I'll be sharing more about in a minute, is that the adult piece is really, really important, as is the policy piece. So, you need to have really good structure and communication with families and school policies and things like that. So that's kind of, I guess, that part of our presentation. We were sort of talking about, what is bullying? What does it look like? And also where bullying and SEL intersect and overlap. And now we're going to be talking about some of the specific strategies and resources that your school or district could implement to do bullying prevention. So It starts with the adults. Isn't that the case with everything on campus, right? That's why we developed SEL for adults too, because you can't teach skills you don't have, right? And if you have, adults that don't have these skills, then, we're not going to be able to coach kids around bullying situations if the teachers are not supported. So, we need policies and procedures. And also I would add, we need communication with families and communities around those policies and procedures. We need to teach adults how to recognize, respond, and report to all staff. You need to teach them what bullying is, and you need to teach them what bullying isn't. And then we also need to teach skills to children and engage families. Like I said, I think every state now has bullying prevention laws. And the bullying prevention laws pretty much say that you have to have a policy, and that if a kid reports bullying, that it has to be investigated, and that you have to do something about it. But that's mostly where it stops in most states. It doesn't actually say that you have to teach a program or that you have to provide in-depth staff training. So what we're asking you here to do is do more than what is legal, what is the law requiring in your states. Because if you have a policy on the books and you have a 15-minute thing at the staff meeting at the beginning of the year saying this is your legal responsibility, you can check that box. And you're not going to be doing anything to really move the needle on the problems in your school and to create the school. So we're going to talk here just about, what does that look like? So like I said, policies and procedures, probably your district office already has that for your district. So you don't need to make those up. But we do include sample policies and procedures in our bullying prevention unit with the online resources. So if you are developing those, if you're at a district office and developing those, we have templates and things that you can use, but likely your district already has those. And like I said, I would also make an effort to communicate those with families, because when bullying situations arise, if you have had really good communication with families along the way, they're not as problematic when you call up a family member and you say, hey, your child has been bullying. They are less likely to push back on that phone conversation than they would be if they had never received any communication from your school about it. I would also say, too, that doing bullying prevention work is a very good way to engage with families, because families like bullying prevention. They want you to do things in the school that helps keep their children safe and included. And so by doing bullying prevention, you're also helping to build relationships with your families. And for those families of kids that are targeted, often when they see that you're doing programs and trainings and things around bullying prevention, they are much more, they're softer when it happens, when they see that your school is making efforts, legitimate efforts. So, yeah. And then also we need to teach all staff how to recognize, respond, and report, so that you're covering your legal basis, and also so that they know how to care for the kids and handle those. We have this training within Second Step. If you're in elementary school, we have the bullying prevention unit comes with staff training, online training. So these are 3 strategies we know from research: developing a positive school climate, bystander-focused anti-bullying intervention, and addressing harassment. So as I said, bystander-focused. That's why it has to be done whole school. Addressing harassment, we'll talk a little bit about how we do that in our middle school program here in a minute. So let's define school climate. School climate is broadly defined as the values, relationships, practices, and structures that contribute to students' experiences at school. And this was when we first started our presentation today. This is what I was talking about when I was saying, we kind of have this opportunity right now to recreate school climate, because many of your schools had been either closed most of last year or were not functioning as a full live community. Whereas right now, you've got all your kids showing up. probably for the first time in a year and a half, and it is such a unique time to say let's come back better. Also, I would suggest that you should really engage your kids around this, and talk about that with kids. Have that be a topic of your, class meetings, and say, what do we want to do differently? How do we want to be better? So yeah, I think that this is the timing is good right now. I think, like I said, we and also some of the tribalism that kids have in school is kind of broken down, like the cliques and the tribes are not as solidified at the beginning of the school year either, when kids are kind of making new friends and they've been gone for a while, and they're rebuilding their support networks. So it's also a nice time to think, gosh, maybe we could, make friends with kids that are outside of our normal friend group that we had before.
Amy, I think that's such a great point, that it's not just that kids, the tribalism, but the kids haven't experienced this sense of being in a classroom. I know my husband is in a classroom, and he's back in the classroom in person for the first time this year. And a lot of the kids have forgotten how to behave in a classroom because they were in a virtual setting, and that there's a resetting of expectations. And so this is a great point, a great time to do that resetting of expectations. And I want to go back to a step that you were talking about, all the training and making sure that staff know what is expected of them. I think it goes beyond just having those policies and that staff training. All of this is also a good time to remind your staff that they're accountable to this, not just that you have the policies in place, but that you're going to abide by, and you expect them to abide by those policies.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So how to build a positive school climate, develop rules and norms. And like I said, I would develop these, with your kids too, like have them share in on, when you're talking as a class and as a school about what do we want to be? How do we want our school to feel? Promoting positive peer relationships and building relationships with students. All of these are ways that can contribute to a positive school climate. And also, as we're talking here, if you want to type in the chat box, if there are resources or ideas, things that you do in your school, that you want to share in the chat box, please, by all means, we would love to hear your ideas as well. So climate, SEL, and bullying. Social emotional learning fosters empathy and compassionate action, teaches perspective taking, builds social skills, and establishes positive school norms. Bystander bullying prevention, we know that students have a lot of influence over each other, a lot more than we do as adults. And so to try to create this, we're empowering them to take the lead, and we're wanting to kind of give our kids what they need to support, like I said, welcoming and inclusive schools so that all kids can feel safe and welcome there. So many of you, I imagine probably almost all of you, are using Second Step in your schools, because that's who we sent the invitation for this webinar to, is the people who are already in our database. So I imagine if you're in our database, probably you are using Second Step, or you have some relationship with Committee for Children. And many of you are not doing the optional additional add-on unit of our bullying prevention unit. You're doing the SEL program, which is fabulous, as we know, but also there are some things that we know from research that you need to do in addition to that. And you can do this, even if you're not doing Second Step, you could also just teach these skills. We know that doing research-based approaches like Second Step and like this bullying prevention is going to be certainly easier, better quality, all of that. But also if you don't have that yet, you can also start doing this even in the absence of a program. And hopefully as you build buy-in, hopefully that can come. But anyway, there's things that you can be doing anyway in your school around all sorts of SEL and bullying prevention. And these are some of the things that we teach in Second Step. So we teach being safe and respectful. We teach how to recognize bullying. And like I shared the definition with you before, how to report bullying and how to refuse bullying. This is kind of assertiveness skills. And very importantly, how to be a bystander who helps. And as the kids are really, the kindergartners, the young kids, we focus more of the emphasis on reporting. And as kids get older, we focus more of the emphasis on being a bystander. Because you're not really thinking, a kindergartner isn't going to be probably not a hugely super strong bystander as a fifth grader could be. So so that's our elementary program and what it teaches. In our middle school program, and also, like I think I said this before, this is a separate unit. So if you have the second step SEL program, if you do not have a notebook that looks like this, then you would need to actually purchase this as a separate product. But in our middle school program, it is embedded in the program. So if you have a license to second step middle school, then you already have this. And it is the middle school unit on recognizing bullying and harassment. So this is where we teach middle school kids how to recognize bullying and harassment, how to stand up safely to bullying and respond appropriately to harassment. Policy recommendations. I know this slide has a lot of words, but, policy is really important in bullying prevention, because if we don't have good policies, we can't enforce, the rules. So we have to have this framework based on periodic research-based training and education on bullying prevention for adults and kids. We also need policy, and then we need skills to teach the things that are in those policies. So, we also think replacing zero tolerance policies with equitable evidence-based strategies that foster a school culture of safety, support, and inclusion. Creating a framework for schools to implement SEL as a school-wide intervention that promotes and aligns with bullying prevention. So I know that's kind of wordy, but basically what that's saying is that I think you want to align your SEL and your PBIS and your bullying prevention and your school climate initiatives. You need to bring all of those things together under one roof. And so when you're talking about these as a staff, you're talking about all of this together rather than doing this thing and that thing and having them feel separate and disparate, because it's confusing to teachers. So, providing sustainable and appropriate funding for SEL and bullying prevention efforts. And this is where I think most states have their bullying prevention laws, but the laws are unfunded in the sense that there's no funding for curriculum from the state. So you'll have to use your own funding for that. As well as establishing mechanisms to continually improve. And right now, it's a really good funding environment. There's a lot of federal money right now, as far as COVID relief buckets that you can use on SEL and bullying prevention, because it kind of falls into that school mental health category. So there might be opportunities right now to fund programs, that a year or two ago might have felt difficult to fund. So ways to protect tweens and teens from online bullying. Boost knowledge and conversations about online safety. Cultivate belonging at home and school. Teach social skills. Teach and encourage positive bystander behavior, and understand the blur between digital and physical bullying. Kids don't differentiate between their in-person lives and their online lives. It's all overlapping in one. So if you're seeing bullying in person, it's showing up online, and vice versa. So, and again, this is why prevention is so important, because we as adults cannot possibly be out in every conversation they're having on the school bus or the playground or, on their online platforms or their text messages. So trying to police bullying is really difficult, whereas teaching prevention and creating, a culture among kids that is supportive of inclusive and kind environments is actually going to be much easier and more effective than trying to be all the places that they are. And also that's not possible anyway. So, okay. So I want to share with you another free resource we have, at Committee for Children, which is Captain Compassion. This is Bullying Prevention Month in October. I should have mentioned that earlier on. And we have, a comic strip that we release every year. And it is Captain Compassion is our superhero that teaches kids about bullying prevention. Sarah just posted that in the chat box. And we're also going to be including some of these resources in the follow-up email, as well as a recording of this webinar and also the slides. So, but Captain Compassion is our very own superhero. And we have, like I said, we have comic strips that are released every year around this. Did you have anything more to share on that, Sarah?
Well, it's way more than a comic strip. There are decoder rings and posters and ways to take a stance and say, I'm not going to participate in bullying as a bystander who isn't helping, or as a person who is bullying, right? I'm going to be a better person. So it's way more than just a comic strip. And all of the resources from the past several years are on the website there as well.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating that, Sarah.
Yeah, we did just get a question about whether the bullying prevention unit for the K-5 might be added like the middle school has done, and I don't think we have anything specific in the works, but I know that we are always trying to update and iterate on our programs, so I wouldn't be surprised if, within the next few years, we're looking at that kind of an update. Yeah,
thanks for that. And if you would like that to be the case, we always track your requests. We have a big long log. Every time we get a request from a client, we really do add it to our list of things to consider, because everything we do, we want to support the work that you're doing in schools. So another thing I didn't have a slide for, I should have, is that we have a podcast called Imagine Neighborhood. And Imagine Neighborhood is not directly related to bullying prevention, as it is more, it's a podcast for kids and families, and it has just a lot of kind of SEL content, and these are also family engagement resources. So Captain Compassion is certainly something suitable to send home with families, as is the Imagine Neighborhood podcast. Those are great things. And we have, in the Imagine Neighborhood, we have a series of Imagine Neighborhood episodes called Imagine Equity that are really good conversations for kids around equity. And so in addition to that, and that's also listed on this anti-racism and anti-bias resource webpage. And I wanted to highlight this specifically because, like I said early on, we know that racially based bullying is a big thing. And so obviously we're trying to do a lot in our schools, and we at Committee for Children are trying to do a lot to encourage schools to do work around anti-racism and anti-bias. And also, for those of you that are focused on bullying prevention, you really couldn't, look at bullying across your campus without considering the implications around race-based bullying, because that is also there in your schools. So what we did is we created a web page, which Sarah will post if she has not already, that is about that just lists a lot of resources that we have kind of properly vetted. And we also created an alignment chart with Learning for Justice activities. So if you're not familiar with Learning for Justice, they have hundreds of free lessons and activities. Anyone can register for free. They have all sorts of lessons around, racial justice, and also just inclusion, all sorts of things around that. And we're also going to be developing another version of that with an organization called Facing History in Ourselves. And so that will be coming at some point. But for now, we have this anti-bias and anti-racism webpage. Another organization that I personally like a lot is GLSEN. For those of you, maybe you've heard of GLSEN. It is an organization that has lessons and activities and things that can support GBLTQ kids and communities. And there's also free lessons and activities that you can do if you want to do more to support those kids and families. And is there any other resources that you think of, Sarah, that I'm missing here?
Those are the ones that I had listed for us to share out, so I think that's pretty good. I did put the Imagine Neighborhood link in the chat as well, And I think that's an awesome resource. They do actually do some specific bullying podcast episodes. So,
oh, they did. I didn't realize.
And also
they had.
around, yeah, there are a couple of them, and they're also around equity, but really about like how to be a good friend, how to be a good ally in general. Oh, and I love them as an adult. There are a lot of little sort of, I guess you would call them Easter eggs in that gaming way, little treats in there for adults that are kind of above the kids' heads, but really wonderful in those episodes, as well as everything that's really awesome for the kids learning. My 9-year-old loves them, even though they're kind of designed for a little younger kids. So.
Yeah, and we've had I don't know how many, 300,000 people subscribe or something. I don't know exactly, but it's hundreds of thousands.
It's won some awards too,
yeah,
so that's pretty
really
fantastic.
And that's something that we have. I also think too, one of the things that I kind of just personally like to also mention whenever we talk about bullying prevention is kind of the mental health side of things too, is that, as much as we want to encourage you to do bullying prevention and anti-racism and these things in your schools, I would also like to also extend that to advocate for doing, some also more specific work around mental health in your schools, because just like SEL does not check all the boxes in terms of bullying prevention, SEL does not also check the boxes in terms of, what mental health education can look like. I personally am on an advisory board for a nonprofit called Erica's Lighthouse, and they have free lessons on depression and anxiety and, mental health. They're all free. I know that there's a number of other organizations that work in the field of suicide prevention. Suicide prevention, depression prevention, because I think some of these things also, those are things worthy of doing anyway, but also it would, when we're talking about bullying prevention, one of the effects of bullying prevention is that it can create some pretty serious mental health consequences for kids that are targeted. And many of us have seen things in our own communities and in the media, where bullying has led to certainly suicide, and also, like I said, things like substance abuse, and there's a lot of other mental health things that could show up in terms of, around surrounding bullying prevention.
And the CDC has a lot of great resources on that front as well, specifically pointing to the mental health impact of bullying and how to reach out and find some resources for that.
Thank you. So that's it as far as our content, but we certainly have more time here if you have any questions that you wanted to ask in the chat box, or if there's any resources that you want to share. We always like to learn new resources and share them. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as the slides and some of the resources that we've mentioned. But I don't know, do we have any more questions that have come in, Sarah?
Well, there is the big question that's the hot topic right now about social emotional learning and critical race theory, which I don't think we have a lot of time to address right now, but I think that there are some resources coming out around that topic. And I think the best approach to that is to approach, rather than talking about the SEL, talk about the skills that are being taught and focus in on if you're using our program, for example, focus in on the scope and sequence and what's actually being taught in the program. And I think that's a big front. You mentioned something, Jessica's Lighthouse or something. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, it's called Erica's Lighthouse. That's
Erica's Lighthouse.
I can post the link in the chat box. But they have free lessons that are on kind of mental health awareness. And I know that there's also other organizations that work in those fields, because like I said, I think, unfortunately one of the effects of doing of bullying, is definitely depression, anxiety, and that can also lead to suicide and substance abuse and, some other things like that. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box.
I just did get that in there for you. Yep.
Great.
It looks like somebody else found it along the way, too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I hope that this was helpful to you, and I hope my goal of this today was sort of to inspire. I know that all of you, you wouldn't be here and you wouldn't be in education if you didn't really care very deeply about the kids. And so often, you know that this is important and you want to do it. I'm 100% sure of that. I have done enough bullying presentations at conferences to know how much all of us care about this work. And I think right now we do have this little window of opportunity where we're recreating school culture. Also, it's a little window of opportunity that there's some extra funding right now that isn't necessarily typically the case. There's a little bit more money. We're having, we're recreating school culture. And I think also, especially when it comes to topics like race-based bullying and things like that, they're getting attention right now that we can sort of say, hey, look, now's the time to do something. So if you don't have anything else, then maybe we'll give you a few minutes of your time back and then wrap up.
All right, wonderful. We've had a lot of gratitude, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who has joined us today, because without you're actually reaching the students and the schools directly, and we really appreciate that. We just want to help you out with a few resources and support for what you're doing.
Great. Thank you. And I hope you all have a great afternoon and best of luck with your Bullying Prevention Month efforts and your school year ahead. Thanks.